Can I just ask, who's come from London or somewhere else? Wow. I'm sorry you had to pay such a horrible rail fare. It really is disgraceful, isn't it? I'm one of those people who passionately believes we should renationalise the railways and make them free for everybody over the age of 80. Good. Well, now, could you just stand in groups? People, anyone from an academic institution, anyone from a research institution, anyone from an NGO, what else? Government? I don't know. We'll have to shout and find other people. Just find other people. Shout, shout!
Okay.
Well, I put this up about what you knew about, because I thought it would be useful to get an idea of the range of experience, and we've actually got a lot of experience in the room. And so, as we go through the day, the danger is that I will dominate too much. So do interrupt and contribute from your own experience as we go through. I put a program up here. This is just an outline. But what I suggested, who are we? We've done that. What do we know? What do we want to know? Let's just do that. What do you want to know? I mean, you must have come because you wanted to know something. Unless you were just curious. Maybe you were just curious. Okay, well, look, the program, as it is, so we've done who are we, what do we know, what we want to know. The context is, I think, really, really important. And I have to warn you in advance, I am very, very angry about what is happening with development approaches and methods. I think it's on a wrong course, and this is contrary to a lot of the stuff that you'll be learning, picking up on this course. I think things have gone wrong. It's not that it's either or, but I think that the balance between two paradigms is wrong. It's gone wrong. I think it's gone badly wrong in development, particularly with bilateral donors. And I will tell you why I think that, and you can please disagree with me. So that's it. Context, and then participatory approaches, and do they provide us with a win-win? And then just before the break, I'll tell you about the sources which are on the tables here, so that over the break, if you want to, you can look at them. And I'll also leave them out over lunch, in case you want to look at them over lunch, because there are a lot of materials and a lot of sources, and there's an awful lot that we won't cover this morning. Is that all right so far? And then, after the break, the hope is that we can do practicals, and this would be participatory mapping as a practical, and matrix scoring, because participatory mapping, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you have got experience of participatory mapping, have actually practiced it. Could you raise your hands? Don't be shy, I'm not going to cross-question you. A long time ago, that's fine, that's fine. So we've got experience of participatory mapping in the room, but it's a good one because it's fairly easy to facilitate, and it gives us an opportunity to aggregate data. And then matrix scoring, where was it? Matrix scoring, quite a number of you, 1, 2, 3, again 6 of you experience of matrix scoring. Yeah. Well, that's also really good, but it's a very, very versatile method. So I thought we might do that. And then after that, we can do Q&A as we go through. But after that is the really vital question: so what? You know, if there is, as I believe, a latent revolution in participatory methods and generating statistics, do you want to be part of this? Do you dare to take the risks? and accept the costs, or do you want to play safe? Because playing safe is represented heavily in Have Practiced, Log Frames, Results-Based Management, questionnaires. But there are others in here that you've also marked. And there's really good experience in participatory M&E. Who's got experience in participatory M&E? Right, well, I mean, let's think about this. I mean, towards the end of the morning, we might have a sharing of experience with participatory, or will there be other opportunities?
With this group, with everybody here, not necessarily. I mean, for those of us who are staying on this course for the rest of this week and next week, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I should warn you that I have many, many defects. You have only got to ask my wife. But one of them is I'm hopeless at time management. So whether we have time for a bit of sharing of your experience with participatory M&E at the end of the morning is an open question. Let's put it like that. Good. Now, if you want to sit down on a chair, that's absolutely fine. There are chairs. Well, the first thing is a question about the context that we're living in. My own view is that this is an extremely exciting time to be alive as a development professional. And one of the reasons is the SDGs, because the SDGs are universal. SDG number, am I using jargon that is SDG? Are you comfortable with SDG? Sustainable Development Goals replacing, we hope, depending on the decision of the General Assembly of the UN in September, but very, very likely, I think, because of backing with the G77. And the Sustainable Development Goals have already been integrated in national policy. I learned last week in New York. They've been integrated in Brazil, in Ethiopia, and in Indonesia, 3 widely scattered. And we've got some Ethiopians here. Yeah, well, you have already, you're ahead of the game because you've already incorporated the SDGs in national policy. And one of the SDGs is, number 10, is to reduce inequalities between and within countries. That includes Britain. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, and because they're universal. And let us hope that they get through. But that's one of the reasons why I think it's very exciting. But it's also a very exciting time to be alive because of the methodological revolution, which is there for anybody who wants it. And what I'm hoping to share with you this morning is a bit of this methodological revolution, but also the fact that the whole trend, the sort of magnetic trend in development, is away from this revolution. So it's a question of, well, it's more than a rearguard action. It's a question of a really, really strong offensive to try to make this real. That's my view. I've often been wrong in the past, and you will use your own judgment. So in terms of context, there's both that excitement, those two excitements, but there's also a third factor, which is this, and I'm not doing this as a participatory exercise with all of us, but this is what another group came up with. I asked them for poor people, for vulnerable people, for people who are marginalized, for people who are excluded, for people who are stigmatized. Are things for them changing slower than they were 10 or 15 years ago, about the same rate, or faster? And you can see the result. Can you see the result? It's dramatic. And this is a very, very widespread view of people in workshops like this. What it means, though, is that if things are changing for them faster and faster, we have even more of a challenge to keep in touch and up to date. And one of the ways of keeping in touch and up to date is by being participatory and having participatory relationships and using participatory methods, because this enables those people it can be empowering for them, but it also enables them to express their reality. So we have these questions here. Whose knowledge, whose priorities, whose appraisal, whose analysis, whose planning, whose theory of change, whose action, whose indicators, whose emanating, who participates in whose project. What is our normal mindset, our default mode? It's us, us, all the time, not them, them, them. And the question is, and in my view, the opportunity is to continually and repeatedly turn this on its head so that it's their reality that really counts, and their rapidly changing reality, which we have difficulty keeping in touch with and up to date with. So there are all these questions, which I won't go through, the who and the what questions, but you can look at this, and if anybody wants to photograph it or do any copy it out or anything, you're extremely welcome. And you can add your own. But the answer to all these questions is actually that they can. And one of the fundamentals of participatory approaches and of participatory statistics is summed up in the slogan, they can do it. I mean, to say us and them is, I know this is an unfortunate binary, but you know what I'm talking about. They can do it. Again and again, experience has been that people who are lowers can do more than the uppers suppose they can. Children, in my view, almost invariably can do more than their parents think they can, except in China. The Chinese seem to have got a genius for, there's some secret there, which I think the rest of us need to, at least I speak for myself, need to learn, because they seem to be able to bring children on very, very fast, at least if you judge by the pianists. Maybe they're very exceptional. So this is really exciting, because if we can turn things on their head, then it is a different reality which may be expressed, and different categories, and different insights, and different priorities, not those that we project onto them and suppose that they ought to want, but those which they actually do want. Because here you see awareness, aspirations, priorities changing even faster in the view of this workshop than the conditions which they experience. I'm using this word paradigm, without much apology. For about 15 years, I wanted to use the word, but I didn't dare to, because I was afraid someone would ask me what it meant. And you may have the same problem. So I thought I'd better invent my own definition. So I have. And this is what it is. And this is fundamental to what we're doing today, and what we're discussing today, and the things that I'm angry about. So it's these things all related to one another, words and concepts, values and principles, methods and processes, behaviors, not normally included in paradigms, not at all. But if you can go to Thomas Kuhn and all that stuff, it's all physical. Behaviors and relationships, which is a word which is very, very important in development, but actually not very much used. And in the middle of all this is kind of us. It's mindsets, ways of seeing things, ways of doing things. But these are all interrelated. And the question that I throw to you, and I think one of these handouts, I hope, has got this on it. The question I'd like to throw to you is whether we've got a tension in development, and it doesn't have to be a negative one, a tension between a paradigm of things and a paradigm of people. And on this side, you can see top-down, centralized, standardized, controlling, blah, 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 blah. We are teachers and benefactors. We have fixed goals. People are beneficiaries. That very commonly. How many of us use the word and don't like it? I use the word because it's very, very difficult to find a substitute. If any of you have got a good substitute, please tell me, because it will liberate me from this agony of using this word which has got implications. You know, that you're a benefactor, they're the beneficiaries, giving, and so on. Accountability upwards, and this fits with infrastructure and reports, linear, reductionist, simplifying things, and measurement. Everything's got to be measured on this side. And this fits with things. If we're building a bridge, you've got to be on this side. You've got to be. And on this side, it's all the opposites of this. And if you're interested, there's a working paper 344 which you can download, which has got this in much more detail, elaborating on the different methods and all the rest of it. But decentralized, diverse, local democratic participation, emergence. Emergence is a very, very important word. This is the side of complexity, by the way, and complexity science and complexity theory, which has got its own rigor. And again, if any of you are interested in rigor for complexity, I've got a draft paper on this, and I will be happy I will happily send any of you a copy of this draft paper if you will promise that you will send critical comments and suggestions, because it's in draft, and I'm sure it's all over the place at the moment, and I need help. But the goals actually are not fixed, they're evolving. Because with emergence, things change. And one of the indicators of a good participatory monitoring process, in my view, is whether the indicators change. If you have the same indicators at the end of the project as you have at the beginning, I think you can ask yourself, is something wrong? Because if it's really participatory, and if things are really changing, then people's indicators will change. And we know this empirically, where there have been good participatory processes over a number of years. So that's a challenge, an indicator that the indicators change. It's completely contrary to what goes on this side. And then iterative systems, judgment instead of measurement. But they don't have to be either or. Now on this side, two professions have been really dominant, and particularly were since the end of the Second World War with the Marshall Plan. What professions? Economics and
statisticians?
Well, yes. Yes, certainly. Statisticians, economists, statisticians.
No. No.
Education? Population?
Trade.
I should have asked you. I mean,
That should have been.
well, maybe somebody said it and I didn't hear. Because I'm slightly deaf, but it's still in the state of senile denial. So, no, economists and engineers. There's a language which goes with engineering. And on this side we've got the log frame. I mean, this now could be, it's gone beyond the log frame. Now, it's this payment by results, for instance, is an extension of this. This is out of date. It hasn't kept, this is me, it's my fault. I haven't kept this up to date. And of course the idea of income poverty on this side. But it's the way in which the language of engineering has penetrated development is really quite striking. At this, you won't believe it, but at this thing I went to in New York, which was a really interesting part of the future of the UN development system, they're talking about leveraging partnerships. Leveraging? I mean, a lever is, it's completely, the leverage is completely on this side. And then results. I mean, who can be against results? I'm not against results. But if the results are prefixed, then you're saying it's a bridge that we're building. And if it turns out that the bridge isn't what's wanted, we can't change because it's a bridge that we're going to be judged on and paid by, according to. So there's a rigidity on this side, which, and even the word deliver, who can be against delivering? But deliver to me means delivering the groceries, or, you know, sort of bringing something physical. I think our mindsets are altered by the language that we use, and becoming aware of the language and critical of the languages is really significant. So someone from Action Aid, I used to be on the Action Aid board, and I remember Barbara Harris and I, we were both there, we fought against and failed completely. We fought against the tide of private sector, neoliberal language coming into the NGO sector, brand. The word brand, you know, it used to be image, which was a bit softer, but then it became brand, and we fought against it, and we lost. We couldn't keep brand out. Everybody wanted to talk about brand, and now it's just accepted. It's part of the way in which we think in the NGO sector. We think in a private sector manner, and does it matter? And that's another question. Well, each one of us can have our own answers to that. But I also believe that if you can change the language in a good way, that may provide opportunities for mindsets to change. And on mindsets, it's really interesting. Have any of you seen the latest World Development Report? No? The latest World Development Report is on mindsets and on culture and how we know. It's got fascinating stuff in it. But what is so interesting is that the people preparing it were challenged right at the end to reflect on their own mindsets which influenced how they put together the World Development Report. Because if they're talking all the time about mindsets, they should reflect on their own. Did they do it? No. They couldn't take that last step, but if they had, and this was what they were told, if you can do this, you will set a brilliant example to the whole development sector, that we reflect on ourselves and the ways in which we see things. So enough on this. When we start thinking then about how we learn, and this is meant to be about data collection. Is it collection? Is in the title of this one, I think. Data collection. Well, it implies we are collecting, we are using participation to collect from them, rather than we are empowering them to do their own collecting. So that's a tension running through today. To get there, though, let's start by looking at questionnaires. Now, this is really interesting. I think there's more experience of questionnaires than there is of anything else except long frames. So, I mean, this is, I mean, in terms of participatory research, this is a very, very valuable document because it shows how far we've gone. I mean, you've terrific knowledge of long frames. Mind you, you did long frames yesterday, didn't you?
Yes.
So you've got to put a cost there. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. But all the same, there is a huge amount of knowledge of long frames. And not bad. Focus groups and so on. But let's look at questionnaires, because questionnaires are the sort of, they're the, you know, research, finding out about things, and questionnaire. So I'm going to show you something over here. I've got a very, very biased mindset myself. I'm aware that I have chosen an extreme example to to show you, and you will say, well, it isn't like that nowadays, or you've got much better, and so on and so forth. But let me anyway show you this thing and see what you think about it. Oh dear. Can you put the lights out? Now, this is from, it must be about 3 decades ago, so it's a thing from the past. Nevertheless, the question is, does it point to something significant that we can reflect on? A questionnaire, it was called the Nepal Fertility Survey, and it was carried out all over Nepal. And investigators or enumerators or whatever they're called went to villages, and they sat down with villagers and they asked them these questions. And they got a very low response. These are percentages. Had they heard of pills, lube, condom, vasectomy and abortion? You can see very, very low. Can you see? You can see all that. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So,
We can move this. Three social anthropologists saw this and were quite skeptical. So they went to the community that they knew really well, and they asked the same question. And it came up with this. And then they thought, we better check and be sure. So they asked the same question the next day to the same people. And they got that. Why did they get a higher figure the second day?
Because the people had heard of it the first day.
That's right. The person said, yes, you silly ass, you asked me yesterday, and my memory isn't so bad. You know. So, exactly, so the social anthropologist made a mess up as well. So there's no monopoly of virtue and accuracy on one side or the other. But nevertheless, this contrast remains. And here, the conclusion is, must educate. And here it is, there's already really quite a lot of knowledge. And when you think about the situation, abortion was illegal. So if you have let's say a male enumerator going into a community and asking about abortion, what's he going to be telling people? Saying, abortion? Oh, don't know. Now, the importance of this is, okay, it's an extreme example. But if we move now to randomized control trials, how many of you have some experience with randomized control trials? Did they use a questionnaire? Did you use a questionnaire? My general impression is that randomized control trials use questionnaires. Structured, pre-structured questionnaires. In other words, the categories are defined in advance. And randomization takes. I mean, do you need any explanation of randomized control trials?
Similar to medical trials for medicine, there are populations that are split into usually two groups, a control group, which doesn't get the treatment or whatever like social experiment they're trying, and the treatment group that does, and then statisticians put it through magical computer programs that tell you if there was any significant difference between the two populations.
Thank you. That's very succinct and very clear. What I think seems to have happened is that RCTs have become the so-called gold standard. You will have heard this expression. The gold standard for research. And there's a political economy of RCTs, which is huge sums of money poured into the poverty action lab in MIT, which has carried out, I'm told, over 200 RCTs around the world because of the big money which has gone into it. So to find out almost anything now, the reflex is not just the questionnaire. The reflex is an RCT, because only RCTs are rigorous. And that's why I'm trying to say that there's a rigor for complexity and trying to define it. Yes, please.
As we were saying, this has become a donor's requirement, basically. So now we have commercial contracts, and we have to, fulfill ICT as part of our.
You've had that experience.
No one, but it's becoming the trend.
Yes. But donors are requiring it because donors feel they have got to be accountable to taxpayers.
Particularly difficult.
And so they've got to be rigorous. And so they've got to do RCTs. I'm strongly prejudiced against RCTs, except in the context that you mentioned, the medical one. Because, you see, if you've got an immunization or you've got a pill or something, you can have a population and you've got a standard input, which is the pill or the immunization, absolutely standard input. You've got a highly standardized, homeostatically controlled environment into which this is being placed, which is the human body. But unless any of us are sick, our temperatures are probably within about 0.5 degree centigrade of one another in this room. Incredibly closely controlled environment, the inside of the human body. And then a standardized output, which is, did the child die? Did children die, or didn't they die, or whatever? So it makes sense if you really want to test a medicine or an immunization. But it does not make sense, in my view, where you've got complicated inputs, as in community development and action. You've got complicated inputs. You've got highly diverse, non-standardized receiving environments. And you've got multiple causality for any output or any impact that you can find. I mean, supposing you have an impact which is changes in nutritional status. Well, there are so many things which affect changes in nutritional status, including fecally transmitted infections, which are normally not factored in at all. And yet they can be responsible for more than half the stunting of children in the world. But they tend not to be factored in. So when you're dealing with complicated causality, RCTs don't seem to me to make any sense. What they do is, one, they cost a hell of a lot. Two, they tie down researchers for a long time. Three, they have methodological problems which are very considerable with the controls and the treatments, where the controls and the treatments are not the same, where there are dangers of pollution. I've known several RCTs have had to be abandoned because the intervention spread to the controls. There are multiple problems of causality and of interpreting the causality. There are problems of not identifying unanticipated effects because the questionnaires are preset. And we know with Emergence that there will be unanticipated effects, there will be changes in the context and the environment. And I got to 6. Learning, if any, is delayed. I mean, it's delayed by a minimum 2 years. If it's not delayed, it isn't very often not long enough for effects to have occurred, as with stunting studies which I've come across. 2 years is too short a time. These things unfold over a long time. If you do an RCT, I've seen one RCT, and then they went back after 10 years. And it was an utter nightmare because households had changed and people had migrated, other people had come in, and they really couldn't do it. The huge effort went in, but they really couldn't do it with any meaningful learning. So, in my view, RCTs, in many contexts, are a gross waste of human and financial resources and a waste of people's time. And on top of that, but this may be just my own prejudice showing through, when I read the outcome of an RCT, I don't really believe it. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I don't really believe it. I have only come across one RCT ever that has even mentioned the possibility of this. That's to say, of the interview situation being standardized right across the application of the questionnaire, so that you get correlations which are actually correlations of the standardization of the interview situation in which people are giving responses which they think are prudent, self-serving, polite, expected, whatever it is. We know that happens with questionnaires. So when RCTs come up with correlations, you have to ask yourself, are these correlations the result of the interview situation or not? And as I say, there's only one I've ever come across which mentions this, and it's only one sentence. They just say, well, there's a possibility. We recognize a possibility, but they don't do anything about it. But my own experience with questionnaire surveys, and this was in India, is that the most significant variable was the investigator. And one of the challenges with any questionnaire is to treat the investigator as an independent variable and see how much is explained. It can be a lot that's explained. And big survey organizations, try challenging a big survey organization and saying, I challenge you in your next study to treat the investigator as an independent variable. And they will sort of, yes, interesting idea, we'll do that. I've challenged twice, the same organization in India twice, but they haven't done it. It would be too damaging for them because they're a commercial outfit on a huge scale. And I don't think that they're ready for or can handle that degree of introspection and of critical reflection. But that, like most of the things which I've been saying, reflect my own biases, mindset, prejudice, and anger.
A lot of the time there is this question about counterfactuals. Is there, which obviously comes to the RCTs, but do you know or have a counter argument of how we can do counterfactuals with socially complex change? Instead, like obviously I totally agree, I think RCTs are totally stupid in behavioural change situations, but what I see as a common practice is, for example, with ActionAid we use a lot of participatory methodologies, but we're asking the people we're doing the intervention with, and we're not asking the people we're not doing the intervention with, and therefore, you know, you're not seeing the whole picture either. So there is a tendency to be one way or the other. And I was wondering your opinion on like other types of counterfactuals.
Well, this is a terrific question, and I think this is a methodological frontier. Which is a polite and self-defensive way of saying I haven't got a bloody idea. No, but I do think it's a methodological frontier, and I think the area to explore is ask them. You know, there are these two slogans which, if you pick up nothing else from today, or you may know it already, they can do it, and ask them. So my suggestion would be to ask people themselves and to ask them to interpret causality, and there are some examples of people themselves interpreting causality here, and possibly having discussions with people who come from counterfactual environments. It is a frontier, I think, and I think it would be really, really good if it could be explored, because it could provide a credible and possibly much more valid alternative to these huge RCD control groups. Yes?
Just following up on that reflection. For example, usually what we're facing in care, it's like
there are different projects happening in the same area, although different projects have different objectives. So is there space and scope to share information and share data and see what approach? So instead of having a control group that does not receive anything, rather having like sort of a landscape of sharing information across organizations in specific areas, and to see if that, although the nature of the intervention it will be different, but maybe that kind of differentials can be discussed about from the activities that different organizations are doing in similar domains. So if there are like similar climate change projects in a specific area, what are the impacts and how are people measuring it, and is there a scope for that sort of exchange of knowledge based on the different set of activities instead of having we deliver activities and we do not deliver activities. That seems more ethical kind of concern as well behind.
Yes, I think that's a very nice idea. And I mean, that entails collaboration between organizations. And I mean, I think that's...
I still don't think that's counterfactual though.
Yeah,
But, and also, like, when you're on the ground, really, is there that much difference between INGOs? I would argue no. So many of the methodologies are very similar. But I do think there is a way, I mean, there must be a way of talking to more people to
but
get
the inputs
those
are different,
ideas.
right? The inputs will be different from project to project. You don't think so?
I don't know.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Okay, I hope I will not start like a big discussion, but I think the issue of the counterfactual, there are some theories that answer this question, but in my view is an epistemological nonsense, because you have on a side the concept of attribution and contribution, and somehow in project theory you mix them up, and then you think, oh, this is my project, and my project will deliver that. Therefore, the change that has happened in a certain community has happened because of my project, and this is not true. We know that your control, your sphere of control, and that output, the impact is something that happened because you are just contributing to something, and to so many other factors that are completely not under your control. So if we assume that the impact happens, yeah, definitely we are contributing to something. But then the reason why a change has happened has other hundreds reasons, then having a counterfactual is irrelevant.
Yeah.
What is interesting to know is, okay, this area that had a project or a program, somehow understanding the reason of why that change happened, and understanding the reason of why in a hypothetical control group, a change also has happened. But for me, it's much more a matter of how change happens in two different contexts than, oh, that change has happened because of my program. It's not.
Yeah, coming into this is, I mean, if we take this word, where is it? Judgment. We tend to underestimate the value of judgment. And judgment seems to me to be critical in complex situations. But it's not regarded as being rigorous by the people who have monopolized or appropriated the term rigor. And so we have to articulate a rigor which includes judgment and reflex. Is reflexivity a word you're comfortable with? Again, it's another word that I didn't like to use for a long time because I was afraid someone would ask me. But reflexivity, in my interpretation of reflexivity, but you will have yours and please contribute, is reflecting back on oneself and one's own mindset and one's own judgment and one's own values. So it's looking in the mirror, if you like. Reflexivity is looking in the mirror. So if you're making a judgment, one of the things that it may be useful to do is to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm making this judgment. What is there in myself which is biasing my view and biasing my judgment? One suggestion has been made that every academic article that's published should start with a self-confession on the part of the author or authors about their own mindsets. I started doing that, but it became horribly repetitive and rather formalistic because I didn't think that my biases changed very much. And so I stopped doing it. But it is a question. When you're reading an article, you want to know, where is this person coming from? And including what is their background discipline. And I've learnt that I'm pretty sure that I can detect anything written by an engineer from the language. And I'm not against engineers at all. They're wonderful, very, very important people. And then I've got my own language as well. Have you ever used Wordle? Wordle? Who's used Wordle? This is the word cloud thing. Oh, look, do this. If you Google for Wordle, W-O-R-D-L-E, Wordle, you just Google for it, and then you'll get the program. And then anything you've written, or somebody else has written, you simply feed it in and press a button, and you come out with a word cloud. You've seen these word clouds. You know, a politician makes a speech at a party conference or something, and they do a Wordle. And it's fascinating because you can see the words which they're using repeatedly, the concepts which they're trying to embed, and which are significant for them. So if you do this for anything you've written yourself, it's quite revealing because there were sort of favourite words that I thought I was using a lot, you know, rather good words like explore and so on. I'm hardly using them at all. So it throws you back on yourself. Wordle, W-O-R-D-L-E. I encourage students to do that in IDS because of what it can show oneself about one's own vocabulary, concepts, ways in which we frame things, ways in which we categorize things. And again, in my view, every university course should have a session at the end to reflect on the words and concepts and the mindsets which have been formed by the course, so that there's a degree of reflexivity built into university education. Dream on. It won't happen, I'm afraid. So someone was asking what's been happening with participation. So I will give you a, if you turn your seat to there have been many streams of participation over the past years, but the origin of one stream, which is the RRA, PRA one, which is there, was disillusion with questionnaires, because in the past they were not as good as they are now. Computers have made it much faster. These were very long and slow. And disillusion with social anthropology because it took a hell of a long time for social anthropologists to say that they needed another 6 months before they could give an answer. And so these, through frustration, they led to rapid rural appraisal. And rapid rural appraisal was what people were actually doing in order to find out fast. But it was not respectable. And it included things like transects. Some of you have written up that you've some experience of transects. Who has done a transect? No. Am I being intimidating? I mean, there were some, yes, have managed transects. 2 people. Know a bit about 2 people. Never mind. Transects, rapid rural appraisal. The idea of walking through an area systematically and observing things as you go. So it was really to do with observation. That was one of the bits in RRA. Diagramming, going to a community and drawing a map of that community young people and making seasonal diagrams. These were all part of RRA. Gordon Conway was very much involved in developing this with colleagues in Thailand in the 60s. So RRA was an improvement because it was much faster than these, but we did it. We did the diagrams. But what happened then was that there were some scales from the eyes experiences, and it led to PRA, which is participatory rural appraisal, which was based on these two slogans were fundamental to people themselves could make maps. And it may seem amazing to you now, but as late as 1989, we, the development community, did not know that people could make maps. We thought we had to make the maps. And it could be really embarrassing. I was involved in trying to make a sketch map over 2 days in a village in Sudan, and then we showed it to the people, and they looked at it and they were kind of embarrassed to tell us how bad it was. He said, "You've only got one bakery, but we've got 3," and things like that. And we gradually realized that we were not the best people to make maps, but if people themselves made maps. I spent 2 days trying to map the wells in a village in Tamil Nadu, and at the end of the 2 days I failed. Later, towards the end of 1989 in Andhra Pradesh, a group of us were in the community. We asked the farmers to make a map, and in 25 minutes they made a map which showed all their wells and showed which ones were working well and which ones were not. 25 minutes as against a failure over 2 days. And I just thought, what a bloody idiot. I've been all these years not realizing that people could do it, and could do it so much better, and actually enjoy it and learn from it themselves. Because when people themselves do a diagram, they see things in a way which they didn't before. How many of us have got children? Right. Well, what I would suggest to you, I don't know how old, have you got children over the age of about 4? Yes, there's some heads nodding. Well, I don't know, 4 maybe, maybe it's 3, I don't know, or less. When you go home, try this. Yourself, make a map of your environment around your home, and then ask your children to do the same thing. Of course, it depends on how free they are to move and all the rest of it, but I live in a village not far from here. And when our children drew maps, they were so much more detailed than the maps which either Jenny or myself could draw. They had a far greater knowledge. And this was another case of they could do it, because it was their environment. But also, you learn, and they learn, what's important for them. Because young children will draw the playground much bigger than anything else. So when you go home with your children, do have a go at this and see what happens. But do your own as well, and then let them see how inadequate yours is. Or maybe yours will be better, I don't know. So this is what happened. The discovery that people could do their own analysis. And so all the who's questions became much more answered by theirs, that they could do it. And it was just, I have to say, because I was living through this, because I was with other people who were innovating, it was an absolutely thrilling time to be alive, just as it's thrilling now, but for different reasons, because again and again we were finding that people could do things which we didn't think they could. So having that confidence, but also another thing that we learned with PRA, I will call it ABC. And this is attitude and behavior change. That it was our, not their attitudes. In the past it had been, these people are conservative, they're lazy, they need educating, they need teaching, all that old sort of colonial stuff. No. We need to change our attitudes and behavior and to become facilitators, conveners and facilitators. And on the table, you'll find a photocopy of the introduction of a journal which has come out this month, in May, the Journal of Knowledge Management for Development, which is on facilitation. And I've only just printed it out, but it looks to me to be very, very good about facilitation. So if you're interested in facilitation, mark up that you would like a photocopy of this bit of the introduction, which also tells you how you can Google and get the whole thing. So facilitation and attitude behavior. Now, where we are now is a very different. In the 1990s, people would say, we do PRA, or we do appreciative inquiry, or we do planning for real, or we do something or other. But that has all changed now. We're in a very different space in which people inventively combine different approaches and methods. In other words, it's like cooking, where you have a tremendous expansion of the number of ingredients that you can put into dishes. So you can be creative each time, and each time produce something different for the particular context. Although I know those of us who struggle to cook tend to reproduce the things that we know are fairly safe. So what we've got now is we've got a whole mass of different approaches and methods, some of which are listed up there, which can be combined in different ways. And I have to say, ActionAid has been extraordinarily inventive in creating new methods, particularly around issues of power and powerlessness. And I'm not sure, I haven't been to your website for some time, but I suspect that the ActionAid website would be one good source, but also Plan and others. Many, many innovations. And so when we start thinking about participatory statistics, it isn't a standard method like an RCT. It puts much more responsibility on the facilitator, the initiator, the manager than before. And some people don't like that. They would much rather have this with the questionnaire. It's a personal choice, it's an institutional choice. And we'll come back to that. Yeah. Yes, please.
I have a question. I'm also, bringing up my example a long time ago when I was in Bangladesh and also worked with ActionAid and some organization. When using PRA, and I cannot totally associate with that, ask them. Even now I will say, you don't know the answer, you ask them. And I think what my experience was, somehow it depends on actually how you ask them also. Because it's the facilitator, because even for me, going to my own context and my village, I am considered as a foreigner to the villagers. So the way when I am actually asking the question, and sometimes I will hear what I want to hear. Because we have also, I think, contaminated a lot of villages, taking consideration of Bangladesh, with the development work. So they know actually what we want to hear. So somehow, even to kind of that control group and this, intervention group, you won't actually get the real picture. So asking them, yes, it's good, but then I think for me it's so important how you ask them, and also as a facilitator, and I think that whole ABC is important for me because if I'm aware of it, how I'm asking and it's going to influence, then only I can actually do it. Because a lot of people come back that we have done the PRA and this is what the villagers actually want. The villagers want that we want to actually do this ACD center. And I honestly, I said, no, I don't believe it. Because to me, it's not the real answer. And many times I myself wanted to wear kind of like a burqa, so that even, I can't influence if I go and even I try to be one of them and asking the question. So for me, I think my experience is that how you ask them, and you are pretending to be one of them to ask that question. So no matter who is doing the facilitation, and I think it's so important to kind of think about it. Otherwise, we influence the kind of result and even the answer.
Would anyone like to respond to that, or agree or disagree, or elaborate? I've got something to contribute. Anybody?
I agree with you. Yeah. Social bias is massive, and people sometimes don't realise the power of being the person asking the question, which comes back to your point about the varied role of the interviewer, even in these participatory methods.
Absolutely. And that weakness of PRA we hadn't really recognised in the 90s and even in the noughties, but it's definitely there. Now, you mentioned Bangladesh, and I've got two examples from Bangladesh. I'm asked up there, had anybody heard of reality checks? And I think nobody had. Where is it? Reality checks. Oh, wait a minute, no, know a bit about and heard of only, but most have never heard of, and none of you. This is a brilliant approach, which many people don't know about. If you Google for reality check approach, I checked yesterday, it'll get you into the website. What they do in reality checks is a thing called an immersion. An immersion is where you go as an ordinary person, not as someone from a project. And you stay with a family for 2, 3, 4 nights. The nights are important. How many of us have done that at some time? A number have. It's a very, very powerful approach. The World Bank under Wolfenson adopted it for all their senior managers, and many of them went and had remarkable experiences, which transformative is a rather strong word, but it certainly strongly influenced their commitment, their passion, and also their knowledge and understanding. Now, what they do with reality checks, which was started in Bangladesh and were carried out for 5 successive years, this was supported by Swedish CEDA, is they have researchers, usually fairly young researchers, but also older ones from NGOs and so on. And they go and they stay in with the same family at the same time of year for 5 nights. And they go to 15 different sites, so there are a bit more than 30 of them, because 2 go to each site, which have been chosen to be representative of different conditions in Bangladesh. And they stay, and their particular remit was primary education and primary health, because these were sector programs that CEDA was funding. And then they're just ordinary people. During the day they don't take any notes. They do take some photographs. Then they come back together and they share their experiences. And in this way, they are in touch and up to date with what is happening. Social and economic change may be more rapid in Bangladesh than in many countries. It's quite remarkable. The fertility rate is down to 2.2 or 2.3, which is more or less European. It's quite astonishing what has happened in Bangladesh. So it may be exceptional. Nevertheless, what they found was happening with primary education and with primary health was news to the people in Dakar. The person running this had an hour and a half with the Director of Education, who really pressed her to give information about what was happening. And the sorts of things which they identified were, for instance, that the money which was going to help primary education for very poor people was being demanded by the children going to school so that they could buy snacks from aggressive snack sellers outside the primary schools. And this was going on all over Bangladesh, and when this was done in Indonesia, they found the same thing happening. But the officials didn't know about this. So that's just one example. The overconsumption of salt, suddenly. There was terrific consumption of salt. Salt in tea? Have you ever had salt in tea? No, I know, it sounds awful. But in Bangladesh, there was this craze. It was partly because the World Bank had been involved in iodizing salt. And so there was a big, use salt campaign, and the effect of this was actually dangerous for health because of the overconsumption of salt, and on and on. Now this approach has been used now in Indonesia, in Nepal, in Mozambique, in Ghana, and it's spreading, and it's very, very powerful. And coming to the PRA point, in Mozambique, an NGO was pushing poultry, and they did this. And when the NGO used participatory techniques like matrix scoring and so on, they got the feedback that people really liked poultry. When they used this approach of staying with the families and living with them, they discovered that poultry were not a priority at all. But even with the PRA methods, they were feeding back to the NGO what they knew the NGO wanted to hear. And it makes you really wonder how much all of us are victims of this. And when we do short rural visits, we're taken to the same place, sign the visitor's book. We've all had this experience. There are these deeply embedded biases in how we learn. But this is a way of overcoming it. And I'm hoping with the SDGs and universality that this is something that can be done everywhere. It should be done in this country. It should be done everywhere, so that there's a sense of reality, of the changing reality of poor people and of people who are marginalized. So that's an exciting one, and you can Google for it, and I think it's reality check approach. I think it's on the list there. The other one, which I have to show you, this is again from Bangladesh. It's called Measuring Empowerment, Ask Them, and then it says quantifying qualitative outcomes from people's own analysis. Wow. Quantifying qualitative outcomes from people's own analysis. You can download this, again, from the CEDA website. So if you Google for measuring empowerment, ask them, you'll get this, and you can download it. I'll tell you this story as well, because it's quite revealing about mindsets. Again, it's Swedish CEDA, and it's the same person, Dijak, who was involved with the other one, and her Bangladeshi colleagues. A social movement which was being supported by CEDA. 500,000 or more people involved in the social movement. It was to do with land and to do with rights and various things. They wanted an evaluation. They asked some external consultants about empowerment, and the external consultants came up with 5 or 6 potential measures of empowerment. You know, the usual sort of thing: do women go to meetings, and do they speak, and you know the sort of thing that consultants come up with. They used a participatory approach, listening to people, using popular theatre for people to express their values, interviewing people, listening to people. And they found 800 different potential indicators. And they condensed these 800 down to 132. And people then said, yeah, okay. And so they met in groups of about 15, sometimes all men together, or women together, sometimes mixed, every 6 months or a year. And they gave themselves a happy face or an unhappy face, according to each of the indicators. The consultants and people in donor agencies, when they heard about this, they said, and it's all recorded in here, they said, this is outrageous. Don't you realize poor people's time is valuable? How can we expect them to do 132 indicators? They said, either this is really exploitative, or these are not the people we thought they were, because they've got all this time. So they took this feedback back to the groups, and they said, what's your problem? Yes, surely it does take time. It takes 3 hours or more. But we do it, we enjoy it, we find it very useful, we learn from it, and it helps us to change. So it is actually an extraordinary way of generating numbers, because they're comparable between groups, and aggregating the numbers. And how the aggregation can be done is in here by Carlos Barahona, who's at Reading University, who's very, very good statistician. And they're measuring things like gender relations in the household. You know, does the woman just get the fish head? Or what? You know, they identified their own indicators, and in some cases the indicators changed because they would alter them, or they would make the indicators stronger. So this process was one of self-awareness about social change, of generating statistics about social change. Unfortunately, there was then a major corruption scandal, and I think the system does not continue today. But nevertheless, this document is there, and you can read it and think about it and reflect on whether it could be applied elsewhere. So this one doesn't produce numbers. This one does produce numbers. Do have a look at them when we get to the break. Explains where we are. The normal reflex, the traditional approaches, conventional approaches that we have, if it's qualitative, this is participative observation, this is sort of social anthropology, classic approach. Yeah, it's questionnaires or scientific measurement, if we want numbers. Conventional. If we go participatory, the conventional wisdom is that it's only qualitative. Anything that's participatory could only be qualitative. What we're talking about this morning is this northeast quadrant, which is participatory numbers and statistics, and the discovery that yes, they can do it, but we need to facilitate. We need to convene and facilitate. Now, this is quite extraordinary, and you can you can have a closer look at it because you can't see it from a distance. This is a participatory map instrument. And very often the process of mapping is on the ground first. Who's facilitating participatory mapping? Well, you have. Yes, that's all right, don't be shy.
What kind of this one?
Well, it doesn't matter. I'm a long time ago as well.
Close.
Probably a longer time than you. But
So yeah, I mean, you have to kind of put it in the ground, and then people actually look into, they identify kind of the main center. Say it was like in a school, and then you start like you're talking about these tube wells, for example, and depending on like what the villagers will actually give importance, and you start actually having it actually really in the ground, and then sometimes actually transfer this whole mapping to a kind of paper so that you can use it and share for next time and
Yes.
use it for
You can hear that, yes.
And
This
you
is-
use a lot of those materials,
Yes.
sticks and,
Yes.
a lot of clippings, leaves, the natural things to.
And you can, people they'll bring their own symbols very often.
And they'll develop their own categories, aren't they, as well? which is really
And
important.
their
They'll
own
develop
categories.
so that you can have stratification of household
Yes.
levels, but not according to what you've generated, but according to how
Exactly.
they think they've got a tin roof or a bike or a chicken or whatever.
Yes.
That's always the point about how robust, categorization.
See, one of the brilliant things about this is that if it's on the ground, we talk about the democracy of the ground. Have you heard that phrase? You see, if you get down, maybe could 2 or 3 of you join me down here on the ground, like this. If we imagine that we're making a map or a diagram, can you imagine that? That we're all contributing to the map. So put your hand in. We're doing this. Are we looking? Is anybody dominating?
No,
we're just
this
doing
whole
it.
power-
You're
Yeah.
just doing it. There's very
Exactly.
little eye contact.
Yeah.
You see, when you're down in this position, you can't dominate in the same way.
Yeah, the whole power relation becomes.
It changes power relation, and the older men can stand like this. So it reverses the men. It tends to be young people and women who get down and actually do the mapping. So in a way, they're expressing their reality. And one of the things we learnt is that when it comes to aggregation for population, women are much better than men. And if men and women make maps separately, the women will then tease the men. At least this is what I observed in Sri Lanka. They tease the men because the men had missed out some people, whereas the women had got it absolutely right.
It also worked well. We had the experience of doing it with Vicky Johnson in
Oh,
Sierra
yes.
Leone. So we were using it with children. And what was interesting about it is that everyone got involved, all the children of different ages, and the head teachers and teachers kind of did that, stood around looking, and we had to kind of say, no, get involved, get down on the floor, because we were trying to map out the safe spaces in the community that the children could identify.
Oh, how lovely. Was that in Brighton?
In Sierra Leone.
In Sierra Leone you were
Yeah.
doing that?
Yeah.
Safe places for children. And they did that?
Yeah.
And was it then drawn on paper?
Yeah, we photographed it and then we put it all together on paper with a small group of children, kind of like carefully mapping onto the paper what they could see from the pictures that we'd taken.
It's a lovely,
So it can really
a lovely example. And I mean, another sort of example of this is women mapping areas of danger for them, like when they're going to collect water or when they're going to the toilet or whatever. So mapping by particular groups is a very powerful thing as well. You see, if you do it on the ground first, on the ground it's easy to alter things. If you do it straight on paper, one person will hold the pen and that person will be dominant. But on the ground everybody can put their hands in, or anybody who gets down. So it's democratic. But then who makes the map on the paper?
Well, for us it had to be the same.
Do we or do they?
They to be the
But you have to be careful who among them.
Yeah.
Because I've seen them. This was in Kenya. They were doing a thing called Venn diagramming, which showed different organisations around the community, and the distance represented how they felt about it. So the forest department got a very big stone because it was very important, but the women put it a long way away. But the person who transferred it to paper was a man, and he put the forest department close in. So you've got to watch out when that transfer can also be an exercise of power. So this is what we're talking about, and here these are examples. This is an example in Gujarat. They did it on bits of paper with stickers. So it can be done on paper with stickers or with symbols representing different things. I mean, one of their big categories was whether the children went to school in the village or outside the village. You know, we would never have thought of that as a significant variable, but for them it was. Here is an example from Nepal, from Sindhupal Chowk, which has been very, very badly hit by the earthquake, where ActionAid have been working for 20 years or more. And it's an absolute tragedy. And they're doing terrific work at the moment in that area. But in Sindhupal Chowk, what they did was, and this was the breakthrough. It was ActionAid having a major methodological breakthrough in 1991. It's a long time ago. They used participatory mapping in over 130 communities. And they wanted to know the use of services which they'd introduced. And they produced numbers, just like a questionnaire. But because it was on the ground, because there was cross-checking, people can say, no, you've forgotten so-and-so. No, that's not true. They haven't got a toilet. You know, this sort of cross-checking goes on with a large number of people. You can be fairly sure that these figures are far more accurate than anything would have come out of a questionnaire survey. Questionnaire surveys tend to miss things. I'll give you an example. In an Indian village, when this was all developing, we had 4 different groups in different parts of the village, all using these methods. They were using different methods, but they were all visual to identify the population of the village. And they all came up with 355. And I thought they'd cooked it. I thought they must know this is the official figure. But then I came to realize, because these were groups of 10 to 15 people, each group, that there was no reason why any inaccuracy should enter at all. No one had any interest in distorting anything. They had a lot of interest, and you could see it. Judgment, observation, you can see the rigor of people making their adjustments, correcting one another. But in another community, which a colleague of mine, Jules Pretty, he was involved in, they came up with 3 different figures, and I'll just make them up. 322, 320, 325, 325, and 341. And when they came up with different figures like this, they wanted to know which was right. So there was further rigor of cross-checking, and they found that 2 of them had double counted the same household, and the largest one of all had included an outcast family on the edge of the community that the others had left out. So, you know, rigor, accuracy, pretty good in a case like this, I think. This here is worth looking at. This is actually not the map that she's doing. It's another one. But they were organic farmers in Kenya, and she has, the 2 who did this, the 2 women who did this, they've drawn in nutrient flows, and then they've scored the nutrient flows for their importance within their farming system. And if you just reflect, well, I mean, imagine a scientist, researcher, going to a farm and saying, I want to find out the different volumes and significance of the nutrient flows on your farm. And I'm going to do it by observing and all the rest of it. I mean, it would take weeks, and it would probably not be as accurate as this. And yet this was just an hour, a bit over an hour. So it's they can do it. This is what I've already told you about measuring empowerment. Now, these are forms of aggregation. In this particular case, it was violence against women. And this was from 800 focus groups. But the focus groups were very open-ended, so there was an element of judgment in aggregation. There was a big dispute because, and again, this is to do with mindsets. You see, it's so interesting. The person who, this was a thing called Voices of the Poor, which was, I mean, that's what it came to be, which was a major study in 23 different countries, 800 focus groups, God knows how many communities. And we were involved in IDS and the World Bank. Mira Shah was responsible for a lot of the training. She's an absolutely brilliant trainer and facilitator. And she then analysed the results. In the World Bank, they were convinced that violence against women was increasing. No one disputed its seriousness, but they said it's increasing. It's kind of, I've written about this, so it's kind of on the record anyway. We went to the World Bank for just before Wolfenson was going to make his annual speech, and they'd written into his speech that violence against women was increasing because this was the common belief. Mira, having done this analysis, came to the conclusion it was not increasing overall. Yes, it was increasing in some places. Yes, it was very serious, but not actually increasing. And so there was a debate and discussion, but it was too late. It was in Wolfenson's speech. So Wolfenson said violence against women was increasing. However, there was still a dispute. And the data were analysed 5 times altogether. And Mira was vindicated. But that was difficult. It was partly because there were, the focus groups were not standardised. In this case, and do look at the sort of the fine print here. In this case, which is Caroline Moser and Kathy McIlwain, and their work in the Caribbean and in Latin America, they were concerned with violence and the proportions of different sorts of violence as people perceived them. And they did this with over 100 focus groups. But they had a degree of standardization of categories. I don't know their methodology, but probably they did some trials first to identify the categories, and then they standardized the categories in the focus groups so that they could be aggregated. And these are the aggregations here. And what is so startling here is the way in which the common perception of officials and others who were not living in communities was, how wrong it was. It was widely believed that gang violence was what really threatened people, what they call political violence. It wasn't at all. What people were really concerned about and what they found was very, very prevalent was violence against the person, mugging and things like that. Far more significant for people. But this was a big, big switch for the mindsets of officials and others in recognizing that it was that sort of violence that was the priority and not the political violence of gang warfare. So do look at the small detail here. And then, maybe this is the last to look at. This is called the 10-seat technique. And it's really, really striking. It will take me time to find the overhead, so I won't show you the overhead. But in this case, this is quantifying the qualitative with knobs on. I mean, it really is a very, very powerful example. I'll just tell you what they did. They had a separate group of women and a separate group of men. And they identified roles which had got gender dimensions to them. So I'll just read them out. Agriculture, home-related, credit-related, cattle-related, education, purchase of assets, marriage of children, marketing and selling. And they asked them, if you allocate these between men and women and the relative significance of their roles, 10 years ago, allocate 10 seats between the men and the women. And then do the same thing for now. And so they did this. And when the men and the women came together, there was a lot of argument, as you can imagine. But they came to some sort of consensus. And this is the consensus that they came to. And what it shows is, over 10 years, a dramatic change in gender roles. And in women becoming, doing more, which has maybe got positive or negative aspects, I don't know. But without being judgmental about it one way or the other, showing that there had been a great deal of change and that women had more responsibility and more say than they had had before. So this is a very, very neat example of generating numbers about something which is qualitative. And imagine trying to do this with a questionnaire. Yeah, you could. You could try with a questionnaire, but I very much doubt personally, but you have your own judgment, whether what you came up with would have the credibility that this does. Credibility is a very important criterion and a very important asset, I think, of many of these participatory processes. Providing no one person is dominating or no group is dominating. And that's where the facilitation becomes really significant. Okay, well look, we've got through quite a lot so far. It's been an awful lot of me talking. When we come back, we'll go straight into doing some participatory mapping, providing I can find the seeds, but I think I can. I think I can find them. And while we have the group, the break, if you want to look at any of these, I'm embarrassed that these are books by me. It wasn't my idea. But these ones, who counts? There are 3 copies of this, so if you want to look at it, 3 people can look at it at the same time. This has got case studies of using participatory approaches and methods. This is, I won't apologise for. This is called Paradigm Equality and Adaptive Pluralism, and this has got the paradigm stuff if you want it, and you can download that. This is Are We Targeting the Poor? Lessons from the Novel. A very, very nice example of finding out who was benefiting from the programme using a participatory approach. Wellbeing ranking. This has just been published. It's a collection of papers about well-being ranking. This is work in progress. It's by Tessa Lewin, who's a fellow here. Digital Storytelling Handbook. And then over here, underneath here, is this, which is Participatory Impact Assessment. I strongly recommend this. It comes from the Feinstein Centre. It's based on work with pastoralists in East Africa. With participatory impact assessment, including a discussion of concepts of rigour. And these are some examples of it over here. You can download this. It's so much nicer in colour, but it's bloody expensive. But even if you have it in black and white, you can see everything in black and white pretty well. But it's lovely if it's in colour, as you can see from looking at the picture. So that's your choice. Or you can, if you're really skillful, you can download certain bits in colour and not others. If you really want to follow that. But I'm leaving it there because that refers to this, and this has got some before and after stuff as well, which is here. So there's that, and then on that table are various handouts. And if you want a copy of the handout, please put a cross on the post-it, and then we'll photocopy that one for you. Is that all right? And so it's 11:05. How long would you like? I mean, there's no rush if you want to do people and so forth. What do you think, 20 past?
Yeah, 20 past, yeah.
How do you feel? That wasn't very participatory. No, but seriously, I mean, who would prefer half past? 20 past is fine. Okay, we'll go for 20 past.
Bathroom, you're outside, take a right and a left.
I want to start with picking up on two things, just to round off where we were this morning. The first is there's this wonderful book called Time to Listen. Who has come across a book called Time to Listen? You have. Most of you have not come across this book. This is the book. You can download it. So it's if you just Google for Anderson Time to Listen, you'll get it. If you don't want to download the whole thing, then I recommend the introduction and the conclusion. But it's full of very, very good stuff. What they did was, over 3 years, they went to over 20 countries, I think, and they sat down and listened to people who were in the aid chain, people who were receiving aid. And this included people in NGOs, INGOs, probably INGOs in the UK and elsewhere, as well as in-country partners and so on. And simply listened to them. They didn't go as donors or anything, they just listened and asked them to talk. And this is a synthesis of what people said. And it's powerful stuff. It's full of very, very moving quotations, which present a reality which is quite different from the common fiction, not perhaps of present company, but the common fiction of some people in some donor agencies. I mean, just to summarize, they said wherever something really good is happening, there was always a person, which points to the primacy of the personal. People said, we appreciate receiving aid, but we wish we didn't need it, and we'd like to be free of it. They said it comes too much and too fast. Too much and too fast. And this is a bit like DFID, getting the money out of the door is the expression. And the scramble to spend over £1 billion in the last 6 weeks of the financial year, This is the reality of the aid system. And they said, we wish that we could have personal relationships with our donors. We like to know who they are, we like to be able to have conversations with them. And if you think about things, which I was having a conversation with Joe over the coffee break, if you think about things like the log frame, if you go and talk to anybody, in DFID for instance, they'll say, of course you can change the log frame, But people don't like to, and they don't like to partly because they feel desperate that they've got to keep on good relations with the donor, and they haven't met the donor as a person. They can't say it face to face. Even the telephone, has gone out. It's all emails. The telephone is one very good thing to use. If you talk over the telephone, old-fashioned technology, talk over the telephone, you can say things over the telephone, which if you put them in an email, you'll spend hours agonizing how they're going to react to this, blah, blah, blah. What do they really mean by this? It's much, much better to have the personal contact. I mean, this is something that those of us from the so-called North need to learn from the so-called South, because it's no news to many people, yes.
Another question, for example, right now DFID increasingly so is routing its funding through management consultancy. So for example, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, so they're actually our funding manager. So we do not interface with the FID, and we're not allowed to interface with the FID. Our funding manager interfaces with us on our contractual obligation. So commercial contracts is the increasing trend. So we're getting these big bids, big projects, commercial contracts, obligations to have funding managers who are not even in the development sector. So how do we kind of overcome that challenge in communication? How do we use our tools to influence and perhaps to reverse that kind of interaction?
Well, it's a bloody situation. It is, isn't it? It's absolutely bloody.
Performance.
It's absolutely bloody. And I mean, you've simply got to try to educate them. And you've got to keep on pushing at them and try and expose them to the reality. Invite them. And if they don't come, say, well, you didn't come, so, you know, stuffy. But they don't, I mean, I think it's a terrible situation. And I don't have any simple answers. We could spend the rest of the morning on this, but we'd better not. The second thing I wanted to say, but it's related to this, is about payment by results. I've told you my biases and my prejudices. I've written a blog about this. Has anybody seen that blog? It's called Frogs in a Pot. Frogs in a Pot. If you haven't, well, I mean, it's, I don't know, could you make it available to,
Yeah, we can send it around to people, yeah, if everyone's doing it.
Yes, that's right. That's right, but you can get it in e-book. Well, the story behind that, I think it's worth telling you. When Melissa Leach, who's a brilliant new director in IBS, which makes this such an exciting place, when Melissa took over, she talked about reimagining IBS. So in the gents upstairs, I'm afraid women were excluded, but that's what we do with toilets, isn't it? Well, perhaps we shouldn't. In the gents, if you went to sit down and do some serious business, there was a sheet there which said, I am IDS's conscience. Help me to reimagine myself. And so underneath this, someone had written, let's speak truth to power. And then somebody else had written underneath that, yes, if someone will fund us.
Yes.
And this is the story of the reality that we live with, because this blog that I wrote about participation by results is very critical of it as an approach, because I regard it as the latest pathology of this whole trend towards rigidity and away from complexity and away from adaptive learning and the rest of it. But the thing that really shocked me about that was that I realized afterwards that if I had still been trying to get money from DFID, which I had been earlier, I would never have written that blog. And that really shocked me. And that's how we relate to power, with prudence. And INGOs are both victims and perpetrators in their relationships with donors. And it's a tragic situation. And payment by results is a particular example. I know two examples. In fact, if you, she's gone, sending it, I could send you an extract from an INGO in an African country, which is about payment by results. But I know of one case in India of an organization that was nearly bankrupted because they couldn't achieve their results. The senior management had no remuneration for 6 months. And this other African example, the informant told me that said our team here would please, wants to remain anonymous. So I can't tell you the country, I can't tell you the program, I can't tell you anything about it, but it was payment by results. And what was in that email, and I've extracted it so that you can't identify, you can have that copy of bit of the email. The informant says that it was agony filling in all these matrices, that staff spent huge amounts of time agonizing over filling them in and completing them, 17 pages of them. That for reasons outside their control, their partners could not achieve the results. And so they, the INGO, had to fund the partners to protect them against this. So the INGO was out of pocket for reasons which I can't tell you, but they were beyond their control. And they said also that in submitting their proposal, they cut out all innovations except one. And the Secretary of State, in her announcement, she said this is a good way of sharing risk. Well, that's poppycock. It's not. It's a way of transferring all the risk to the recipient. The whole bloody risk. Because they don't get paid unless they achieve these preset targets. So emergence, changing goals, forget it. It's tram lines, it's engineering. And we're not in an engineering world. We're in an emergent, complex world. You see why I'm angry? I really am very, very angry about this because it gets accepted. When the log frame came in, some of us thought it was so absurd and such a misfit that it would die a natural death. Not a bit of it. Lots and lots of consultants got trained in the log frame, and then they trained other people in the log frame, and they made a very nice sustainable livelihood, thank you very much, by helping people to fill in the log frames. Now it's accepted. Nobody quarrels with the log frame. Frogs in a pot. Straight jackets for obstacle courses is the subtitle of this thing. And all of us are in danger of being put in straight jackets for what are really obstacle courses, with unpredictable obstacles and unpredictable opportunities. I could go on, and I mustn't because we must get into some participatory, but I'll just tell you one final anecdote. A funding agency came here, and the work that I do on long-term sanitation, we were trying to get funds from them. And we sat down for an hour. And I said, all through the 90s and the noughties, we would have an element in our grant which was 10 to 15% for unanticipated opportunities. This was Swedish Seed and SDC. And DFID at one time accepted this. And we would report specially on how because we knew unexpected things are going to happen. That's one thing you can be sure about, is that unexpected things will happen, unexpected opportunities to do something other than what you said you would do. And this representative of this organization, which shall remain nameless, looked me straight in the eye and said, the XXXXXXX Foundation does not do complexity. And I thought that the person concerned was being ironic. I'm very sorry, but I think she was dead serious. So this is a real problem that we have in our development work. This isn't what this morning's meant to be about, although it is actually relevant, because there are other ways of generating data and of representing people's realities. And that's what we're going to go into now. Is that all right with you? Yeah. We're going to do factors now. The way we do this, you've got to do it reasonably fast. It's a participatory census. So form groups of, how many are we all together in here? I guess form groups of 3. You can form any group of 3, it doesn't matter at all. And what you do is you create an imaginary community with 20 households. So everybody has 20 households. This is just to make the thing manageable. Draw a map showing the households. You can either use something like a post-it and for each household mark on the categories, or you can use seeds, and there are lots of different seeds here. But if you use seeds, you need to have different sorts of seeds for different categories. It's quite fun doing seeds, so I mean, if you want to do it. If you want to do it with chalk on the ground, you can go out here, there is some chalk here. So you can do it with chalk on the ground if you'd like to do that. Otherwise you do it on paper in here, and there's paper down there, and there are pens. What you do is you draw your community and you draw in the 20 where the 20 households are. And then you have 5 categories. You have men, women, girls, and boys. And each one of these would be a different colour scheme. And then there are disabled. Now the disabled may be men or women or girls or boys, so don't add the disabled in. You can show them, but don't add them in for the population total. But I'm including disabled because they tend to, that category tends not to be thought about and what people actually mean by disabled. So you do that, and then you name your community, give it a name, and when you've got your totals, you come up, and I will put a sheet up here, you come up here and you write in your totals, and then we'll add them up. Is that all right? Is it clear? Ready, steady, go! You can see the result of this. This is the same phenomenon as this. This was 132 villages, and it was with 13 different categories, including social group and so on who was receiving services. But they were marked in a standard way in all 132. On the ground first, and then sometimes on paper. So you've done it, and over just before lunch, maybe someone can add these totals up here and see what we've got in terms of gender balance. I think there are more women than men. I think that there are slightly more girls than boys. And the disabled are really quite few. And one of the reasons why I asked you to do disabled is because this is a very interesting question of perceptions. Because our perceptions of disabled are people who, they've had polio, or they're blind, or they're deaf, or something. In communities generally, disabled is a much more inclusive category. And it includes very old people who can't really look after themselves. And it includes people with conditions which we wouldn't regard as being disabled in a northern sense. So your numbers here are much lower than I expected this, so that I could say this. Transparently manipulative. It's called precipitating. So that I could point this out, because if this were done in the community, these would probably be between 10 and 15%. But it's something you can test for yourself. Has anyone any experience of this?
Yeah, I've done business survey on the disability. So even the standard says like 10%, so 10 in 100. So what we did in Bangladesh, it was actually more. In that survey, we got almost like 14 on a kind of average.
14?
It's much higher. But then, of course, how you classify also that. So mental disability was not.
Mental disability, chronic sickness.
Exactly.
And particularly if there's a man who can't work at hard physical things, he will get classified as disabled. I think more than women, but that's a generalization which I couldn't substantiate. Anyway, you can see that it works, and that you can generate good numbers in this sort of way, because you were cross-checking one another, weren't you? And you were putting your hands in. And everybody, I mean, my observation was that everyone was taking part in this. So that was good and well done. That's a participatory census, which can be very, very accurate. And it can include other categories of things. One group was having a very rich household, and other households. And that's exactly, I mean, well done. I stopped you doing it because it was going to slow you up. But it's fascinating that in Rwanda, well, I won't go and point it out now, but it's over there on the right-hand side. We'll look at that later. But in Rwanda, there are almost 15,000 colleagues. Has anyone worked in Rwanda? No. Almost 15,000. And over 5 years, they went through a participatory process, which was in a program called IMA. And each of these communities has got a cloth map, so it's permanent, not like a piece of paper. They have a cloth map which has got their population and has got them categorized into 3 wealth groups. The poorer people, the middle, and the upper. And amazingly, they have tried to use these in a policy way for identifying who is eligible for a certain form of health insurance and who is eligible for assistance in going to university. But the finding has been that once you start using them in this way, they're liable to get manipulated. So there's a learning going on there. Still, it is very remarkable that they've managed to do this and that they have this large number of maps. One of the articles in the Who Counts book is by Ashish Shah and is about Ubadehi and about this approach and aggregation from the approach. So if you get that book, you can buy it, I'm sure, from the bookshop after lunch or tomorrow after lunch. Do have a look at that one by Ashish Shah, among others. So I'm going to talk about some things here. Then I'm going to ask that question: if you have experience of participatory LME, is there anything you'd like to share? And then I'm going to ask you just to sit and reflect with 1 or 2 colleagues about whether there's anything from today that you can use that you might find useful. So here, people they can do it. Count, estimate, measure, yes. Calculate, value and score, and they can compare things. And it's particularly when there are comparisons that you quantify the qualitative, as you can see here. And people can also, they can map, as we've seen. They can use mobiles. And we didn't deal with mobiles or ICTs, but ICTs are a big frontier. And I'm sorry that we didn't go into that, but it's something that I don't know a great deal about, but which is an exploding area, participatory use of mobiles, and crowdsourcing, which some of you will know about. This is from this book, which I already mentioned, Participatory Impact Assessment, which you can download. It's got a very interesting diagram here about iterative triangulation, because a lot of the rigor of participatory methods comes from cross-checking or triangulation. So you don't just have one way of learning about things, as you do with a questionnaire in RCT. You have many ways of learning about things and comparing them with successive approximation. It's not precise measurement straight out, which a questionnaire does. It's successive approximation, and that's got an entirely different sort of rigor if you're trying to learn about something, because people correct one another. Methods for finding out the same thing, finding out about the same thing, come up with different conclusions, and so you interrogate them to find out which of them is more accurate, or whether they need modifying, or whether there are other ways in which you can approach the same information. So it's a different sort of rigor, and it's in that paper, Rigor for Complexity, and there's a sheet somewhere. If you would like to receive a copy, it can be sent to you. So here we've got matrix scoring as an attribution method. It's not really an attribution method. I think this is a misnomer. But it is comparing different service providers. And you can see what they did on the ground here, and you can see the numbers here. So this is different service providers. Do have a look at it. It's all in here. And this one is before and after. Before and after with scoring. And again, you can see here. I'll leave this up over lunch. You can see here how they've done it. So this is part of participatory assessment of impact. Over here, this is something I very, very strongly recommend to you in any evaluation. And this is asking people to draw a trend line for how good or how bad things have been, with ups and downs. When they do this, you can then interrogate the trend line. And it very often will reveal things which are really significant, which people otherwise wouldn't have felt empowered to mention. So here you see it with this trend line. It goes up, and then there's a big dip here. What is it? Drought. We sold our assets. This is a drought, and then other conditions here. But you can do this in relation to a project. What was the experience with the project? How did it change over time? And if people in a group, you see, in a group, people can show things. It's not even saying them. They can show things which they couldn't say individually, or wouldn't say individually. It's this issue of deference to the donor and all the rest of it. But if people are together drawing a trend line on the ground or on a piece of paper, they have a collective power, because it's not any one person who's taking responsibility. And so this empowers them to say things which they couldn't otherwise. This is the example from Rwanda, which is in the book. And this is participatory GIS. Have any of you come across participatory GIS? I don't think so. This is amazing. This is young people who've been trained to use GIS. And what they've done is they've mapped a slum in Nairobi. There's a whole mapping of Kibera. If you Google for map Kibera, you'll find all the stuff there. But this is not map Kibera. This is on the Community-Led Total Sanitation website. Or if you Google for Mathari, you'll probably find it. And what they've shown here is open drains, which are these open drains which are polluting. They've shown public toilets, which are these, and the size of the circle is how many people use the public toilet. So this one is used a lot. Then they've got areas of open defecation, which tend to be in purple, which tend to be close to the public toilets, which is an interesting phenomenon which one can go into. And this empowers them, because this is something they can use with the City Council, and have done. And the City Council has even asked for more of this, because there are people in the City Council, particularly in the community development part of the City Council, who would like pressure to be applied to the City Council. And we need to remember this, even to remember it with DFID. There are people in DFID who, in my guess, would like us to push back on them more. I remember being called to the World Bank once for a workshop, and they called some of us from the NGO sector to come an afternoon before because they wanted to brief us and they wanted to say, for goodness sake, don't praise us too much. They said, we need you to be critical so that this will empower us within the World Bank to push further with the changes which we're trying for in a participatory mode. So one needs to remember that. They won't say it sometimes to you. They did in the World Bank case. In other cases they won't say it, but they would actually like that pushback. And I suspect this is the case with participation, with payment by results. Because when I wrote that blog, the immediate reaction that I got was I was invited to one of their retreats to be an after-dinner speaker. And I thought that was very, very interesting and encouraging. And a number of informal feedback, that they don't particularly like it, but they're captured by it. And it's now spreading. It's spreading like a virus. And I personally think it's a disastrous extra step. It's like the Gadarene swine, running down a hill into the water. I mean, I think it's a disaster course personally. You may think that I'm exaggerating, but then I would challenge you to ask, are you frogs in a pot? Is the pot heating all the time? And are you just accepting it because you need the money? And are you like me, that you won't speak truth to power as long as you're trying to get money? And yet the people who are providing the money may want us to speak that truth. Anyway, this was very empowering, and it's another thing, they can do it. They can use participatory. Now, we've got, maybe if we run a little bit over time, we've got about 10 minutes. Is there anybody here who's got experience of participatory? Emily, with anything that you'd like to share? What do you think might be useful for other people? Yes, please.
Done it a long time ago, so I don't know whether I remember all the details. But I was actually doing participatory M&E for women's empowerment in Bangladesh, but I was working with, say, US. And I think we started from, we struggled to define empowerment to start with within the organization, and we had definition. And I think suddenly we said, okay, let's ask them actually. Let's ask the women how they would like to kind of define empowerment. And this was kind of the beginning. So we went to the field or village, and then actually asking the question to this group of women. And of course there are like a lot of definition, a lot of different criteria which came in. And what we used that actually information to go back to them, and also because the definition was at this point, and what we wanted to know actually why they're saying that definition, because they had to compare with something. So they actually came up again within the village that, okay, 5 years before they had this situation and they think that they are empowered because of this. So they identified certain things which actually move them. And what we actually did in that whole process, going back to them in a kind of like quarterly basis, because they wanted to kind of monitor the situation. So it's what we did, we kind of facilitated, the whole, bringing the groups or informing those teams can actually come. But they actually worked within, the group, and they identified the changes. And they were actually telling us, this is what we kind of found. So that was almost like our baseline. And they were actually noting down the changes. So all we had to kind of gather the information and we used for our purpose to design program. But ultimately we had to kind of let them actually monitor and also kind of, and there are like a lot of unexpected information that we didn't even think. I mean, initially we thought, okay, we will be asking them, can they actually see whether the decision making or buying medicine for the children or sending the kid to the school. But after some time, we dropped it because they were actually coming up with some of these indicators and some changes that we didn't even anticipate.
Well, thank you. That's a very fine, useful contribution for us to conclude on. I think that the unexpected came up. That people themselves, you convened them quarterly, or they convened themselves. You convened them.
We had to.
You convened them quarterly, and you change the indicators, which is one of the things which I was saying earlier, that if you change the indicators, that itself is a good indicator of a participatory process, and unexpected things came up. So it's a quite different way of going about things from traditional M&E, which is external. One of the phrases that Jeremy Holland uses in the Who Counts book, and this is something to take away, I think, and to reflect on, which I think is indicated in the example you've given us, is win-win. That's to say everybody wins. It's not us gathering data from them, but it's us facilitating their generating data, which they share with us, but which they also find interesting and useful. So this idea of a win-win, which makes data gathering more ethical, and also just, it seems to me, you can make your own judgment, but in a way better, is one of the potentials of participatory statistics. Yes, but very briefly, because we're running.
So, do you envision as participatory data collection as well involving other stakeholders? So in the sense that, for example, if you are working with local institutions to set up systems for data collection within those institutions and the government as well, so really kind of passing the ball on to those stakeholders, would that be considered as an avenue for participatory? I mean,
why not? Yeah, why not? I mean, innovate, see what's possible, push the boundaries of what's possible. That's what I would suggest, be creative. Now, the last thing is to sit in pairs or in threes, and just to reflect, is there anything from today that you pick up on that you might want to use? And we won't have any sort of conclusion. When you've finished that discussion, we dissolve and go for lunch, with the seeds having been sorted. Is that right? So just sit in twos or threes, and anything you take away from today, anything that you might use.
So those of you who've come from outside our IMA course, thank you a lot for coming, and we'll be in touch with the links that Robert will send us. And for those of us on the IMA course, also have a great lunch, and we're going to reconvene at 2:15. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you for being so participatory and creative.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Wait, not against the light.